If you thought the Baby Shark song was annoying, wait until you play against the top Azeri chess grandmaster Shakh who has just come off a great win in the Superbet Classic 2021 in Bucharest, Romania. The game that set up his big success was a win against Levon Aronian, where he managed to beat the very active yet very solid Rogozin system. The way he hit it is definitely something that you can do as well. So let's get into this game between Shakh Mamedyarov against Levon Aronian. And the game went d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, avoiding the Nimzo Indian so that we can block bishop b4 with a piece on d2. Aronian plays d5. And after knight c3 there is a very wide choice of options for black. The main ones being the move bishop b4 that Aronian actually played in the game. If you want to play knight c3 successfully as white, you also need to have a system against the semi-Slav with c6 and the Queen's Gambit declined with bishop to e7. I'm not going to give a full repertoire here, but the most promising lines at a high level currently is the Blackburn variation with bishop f4 and e3. And from there, white set will vary depending on what black plays, where he can choose, to some extent, the nature of the play, depending on his choice of 6 move here. And also if they do play semi-Slav, then in this case, one good option is to go e3. And now recently the shortcut of bishop e2 was recommended by Sam Shankland in his d4 white repertoire for Chessable as an interesting approach where you kind of aim for an improved Meran, because if you play bishop d3, then after dc4 you have to take back. But in this version, if they take, you can play a move like a4 and kind of be able to take back that pawn without allowing their usual b5, bishop b7 and c5 counterplay. And if they go bishop to d6, you can play castles, and Shankland recommends a move b3 and a fianchetto, which is fine. But also the approach of a4 is one that, when I was looking at the Armenian GM Hrant Melkumian's games, I thought he was doing very well with this approach of playing a5 and just grabbing a lot of space on the queen's side. Or if they play some move like b6 to stop that, to then play queen c2 and go for the e4 break. So that's an approach that's not very common, but which can set some practical problems if you are looking for a shortcut against the semi-Slav. If you're enjoying this video so far, do make sure to hit that like button and consider subscribing, especially if you are new to the Illingworth Chess channel. Let's now see how the game played out, where Aronian did play the move bishop to b4. And now there are a few approaches that white can play, from moves like bishop to g5 to exchanging on d5. And then there's the move that Mamedyarov played with queen to a4. So what's the idea of queen a4? Well, by forcing the move knight c6, we're making it very hard for black to get in a c5 push. By comparison, let's say if white played a move such as bishop to g5 instead. Well, black can play the move h6, and if white were to take, and let's just say white plays some normal developing moves such as e3, castles and rook c1, well, black will be in time to take on c4 and then release the tension in the center with the move c5. He can hit the pawn on d4, and with black having the bishop pair and no weaknesses, he's not really any worse in this kind of position. I did see that Melkumian had some nice wins on lead chess with queen b3. It can be an interesting shortcut trying to surprise the opponent, but maybe not more than that realistically. In the game though, queen a4 was played, and it's a move that I currently would say is my favourite approach for white, because we get a more strategic position where after the move bishop d2, we see that black finds it very hard to get in the c5 break when the knight is in the way on c6. It's worth pointing out, by the way, that Mamedyarov has also been very successful with the move of queen to c2, which is somewhat of a prophylaxis against the bishop somehow attacking the queen with a discovered attack later, and we keep this move bishop d2 in reserve. But bishop d2 is also perfectly fine, and actually the old main line with queen c2 being the more modern interpretation. And while with bishop d2, we've got ideas like a3 and trying to get the bishop pair advantage at a good moment, or to force the bishop to retreat to a more passive square. Aronian continued with the main line, which is to play d takes c4, which is not the only move, but it's the main attempt to try to show that the queen on a4 may not be all that well placed in this position. And while white does get the bishop out with a tempo, with the move bishop d6, black reverts to his plan B, which is if you can't get in the move c5, instead play the move e5 and free your c8 bishop and break in the center in that way to challenge white's central majority. Obviously, if these pawn was still on d5, e5 would leave the d5 pawn hanging, so that's why it was good for black to take on c4 and only then prepare e5. The game continued queen to c2. You can certainly castle as well, but Mamedyarov decides just to retreat the queen in anticipation of bishop d7, or anticipation of a6 and b5, both of which might be a bit annoying for a queen on a4. Aronian plays e5. Obviously, the players are very well prepared, and it makes sense for white to release that tension before black would perhaps saddle white with an isolated queen pawn, which would not really be ideal on a structural perspective. It's better to keep the pawn chain united, so d takes e5, or I should say the pawn island united. So knight takes e5, bishop takes e5. And one thing you'll notice for those of you who have seen any of Shakhyar Mamedyarov's games is that his favourite player is Garry Kasparov, and he has a very direct attacking style. He's extremely strong with the initiative, very good at setting practical problems to the opponent, and he shows all of those qualities in this win against Aronian, because he decides not to play some quiet move like castles that gives black very easy development, but instead he decides to play the move f4. A very direct move trying to kick that bishop back so that white can start to push his majority forward. To deal with this, Aronian also plays very directly, playing the move bishop c3. And while that does give white these very nice looking bishop pair, it's also true that the white king is stuck in an open center, and Aronian's next move aims to take full advantage of that. He plays a great move here in knight to g4, attacking that undefended pawn on e3, and potentially knight e3 could be quite annoying to fork the bishop and the knight if white, bishop and queen, if white were to play a move like e4. So Mamedyarov plays the move bishop d4 to defend it, and again, if you give white time to castle long, kick the knight and get those pawns rolling, it's a very rough position for black. So the move c5, again, a great move by Aronian, and for the most part, Aronian does manage to equalize out of the opening, playing very well here with rook e8, castles, because if you try to keep that pawn on e3 defended, your king is going to be stuck in the center. For example, a move like queen e2 would be a bit too greedy here, as black would either play a move like queen h4 and stop the white king from castling short, or you could even play a move like queen to c7, and suddenly it's not so easy to defend that bishop in a great way. A move like bishop d4 could run into something like knight takes e3, a very important tactic for black, that we can play bishop to g4 and basically get the piece back with tactics. So after queen takes g4, the whole point of this very long engine variation, which is kind of important for understanding why black played c5 earlier, because if you didn't play c5, the bishop would be safe and white would just be a piece up. But here black has rook e4, and you fork the bishop. Obviously the rook was under attack before, but you're also threatening to take that pawn on f4 and fork the queen and king. So after bishop f7, it turns out that even though white is up a pawn, the fact is king is very exposed and the black rooks are so active, does mean that if anything, it's black who would be better here. So Mamedyarov, rather than trying to hang on to the pawn, Shakh just gives it back with castles, making the argument that after knight takes e3, bishop takes e3 and rook takes e3, that white can maybe still try to make some use of his more active bishop and his slight lead in development. Granted, if black does manage to catch up in development, his lack of weaknesses will mean that the position is completely equal, so the onus is on white to try to show something here. And Mamedyarov plays a move rook e1, trying to make an exchange happen so that his rook can come to a more active position. Somewhat surprisingly, Aronian obliges immediately with the move rook to e1, which maybe objectively speaking is not a mistake, but I think that it would have been much easier to keep that tension one more move, and play some moves such as queen to b6, kind of prompting white, if he takes, that the black queen can take back and be a bit annoying to the white king with the check. And if queen f2, black can simply swap everything, rook takes e1 with check, queen takes f2 with a check. And in this sort of position after king f8, it might look like white's pieces are more active, that he's got the more active rook and the more active bishop, but without a real entry point to get into the black position, there's no real way to turn that into something tangible. For example, a move like bishop d5, stopping the bishop moving supposedly, might seem very natural, but in reality black can just play bishop d7 anyway, and if black is able to play rook b8, b6 and untangled, the position is just completely equal. But if you take the pawn, you run into rook b8, and black is going to get the pawn back, And we see it at this ending after rook b2 and after the exchange of rooks, or even just keeping the rooks on the board. It's just completely balanced, as black has no weaknesses and his position is just very safe with active piece play that is typical of the Rogozin in general. So had Aronian played queen b6, I'm pretty confident that he would have drawn the game without any real difficulty. At a very high level of play, we grandmasters like to call this a one-game weapon that Mamedyarov played. In it might surprise the opponent and give you a win in one game, but your next opponents at the top level are likely to be well prepared for it, so you might do something different next time. So the game went rook takes e1, rook takes e1, and already black has to be a little bit precise here. The engine will tell you that this is 0-0-0, but with the queens on the board as well, it's much harder for black to resist the initiative. For example, if you play queen d4 now, white doesn't have to play queen f2 anymore. He can play the move king h1 and keep the pieces on the board. And actually, black would be in a lot of trouble with the weakness of the back rank in f7 if it wasn't for the computer move of bishop e6. And the idea of bishop e6 is that basically, if white were to take, for example, that white's not really in time to go rook takes e6 because black can play queen takes f4. And just turns out that even though the black king looks more exposed, the white back rank is also weak, and that gives black the time he needs to coordinate his pieces and basically to maintain equality, because white's king is at least as exposed as black's as it transpires. And if you try to keep the pieces on with rook e4, well, black can put the queen on d5 or on d7, and in theory it's a little bit better for white because you've got the slight weakness on e6, but realistically black can play moves like rook c8, queen d5. He can defend his one weak pawn with his pieces, and it shouldn't be too difficult to hold the draw for a player of Aronian's caliber. But of course, as white, it's nice that you can play without any risk, right? So the game instead saw bishop d7, and that actually turns out to be quite a big mistake, even though it's a very natural-looking developing move to develop your bishop and try to go rook c8 and pin. So the question is, do you see the opportunity for white? Mamedyarov saw it, so are you up to the task as well? It's white to play. So if you want to get the most learning out of this video, I do recommend that you leave a comment below with the move that you would play in this position. That way I can celebrate and congratulate you if you got it right and give you some encouragement to keep on learning and improving if you didn't get this one correct. After all, when you lose, you also learn. So the answer is that the move queen b3 is just a very strong double attack. You may recall the old dictum of the great John Nunn, loose pieces drop off. And we see that with both the pawn on b7 being undefended and the f7 pawn only defended by the black king. That's what makes these tactics so effective. Now, the best move according to Machine is to play bishop c6 and, well, just give up the pawn and just play it like it's a normal position. In that case, the fact that black does have relatively free piece play and no real weaknesses aside from a slightly more open king does mean that black does still have reasonable chances to save the game. White's definitely the favourite, but a pawn is not always going to be enough to convert the advantage to a win in every single case. Instead, black played queen f6, and I think that Aronian's hope was to try to confuse Mamedyarov with some tactics, but Shakh is the king of tactics, and he realised that with queen b7, the black supposed threats just don't really do anything. After the move queen to d4, king to h1, the computer recommends for what it's worth that you should play rook to f8, for reasons that will become clear a bit later in the game. But even then, you can still play moves like b3 and just consolidate the extra pawn. Even an endgame like queen d5 is one, I think, if black were to trade, that white would have extremely good chances to win. Maybe it's better for black to try to harass the rook, but it's definitely clear that black is still worse in such a position. That he's down a pawn for no real compensation. Still, this was better than what happened in the game, because rook e8 turns out to be, we can say with full confidence, a decisive mistake here. So after rook takes e8, bishop e8, what do you think is the key move for white? And again, we see how important it is for Shakh to have played all these moves accurately, because if he doesn't find this move here, then black would actually have full compensation with the threat of mate and also the threat to f4. So what's your answer here as white? Okay, congratulations if you came up with the move bishop takes f7. It's the only move to keep an advantage, but it keeps a decisive advantage. Because if you take that bishop, you get mated with queen c8. And, well, the king is smothered here. Bishop e8, queen takes e8 mate. That's what you get when you hit that subscribe button. Instead, black played the move king to f8. And now white has the very important move. So hopefully you guys saw this when you played bishop f7. The move bishop to b3, stopping the back rank mate. And not only stopping the back rank mate, but also sort of taking the sting out of queen takes b2, because then queen to b4 is checkmate. And if you take on f4 instead, white can play the move queen takes a7. And again, we see that white is just up 2 full pawns as the attempt to win another one back with queen c1. Again, black is not in a position to take the poison pawn because once more queen c5 is mate. And again, the theme comes up of the bishop smothering in the king, stopping the king's escape. I guess we call it the traitor bishop. The game concluded queen to c5. White played the move queen d5. Obviously, 2 extra pawns will be enough to win in a same-coloured bishop endgame. Black played queen to c1. White played a very nice move, bishop to d1, realizing that black is not in time to go bishop a4 to use the pin, because b3 just blocks it. Game went queen takes f4. And now white is just up 2 pawns after queen c5, king g8. And there's the second pawn, queen takes a7. If black plays queen to c1, we can simply go queen d4. And that will ensure that we keep both the bishop and the pawn on b2 protected. Since if they play bishop a4, we can just take it. If they play bishop h5, we've got queen to d5. And that will also win the bishop as it transpires. As bishop to f7, queen d8 does prove to be a familiar mate that we saw in an earlier note. Instead, the game went h5. And the rest is sort of a matter of technique. I'll show the final moves quickly, because maybe there are some of you who perhaps played a chess game where you're up 2 pawns and somehow you failed to win or even lost. So let's make sure that you know how to convert it. So what Shakh does very well is he plays the move queen f7. Just because you're an attacking player, it doesn't mean you turn down an easily winning ending 2 pawns up. Aronian played queen c1, king h2, queen c5, trying to defend against the mate. White plays queen g8, bringing that king out into the open. Queen to e6. Black played the move g6. If king h7, you should actually play to attack the king. Okay, to be fair, you can push your a-pawn, and pushing the passed pawns will also win. But bishop c4 and going for some mate threats is definitely a nice way to end the game with a flourish. The game saw g6. Queen f6 is just a really strong technical move, making sure that there aren't going to be any checks against the black-white king. Because when you have the queens on the board in a simplified position like this, the main thing you have to watch out for is that they don't somehow get some perpetual check like queen g3, queen e1 or something like that. By keeping a queen on the central dark square, we make sure this is not going to become a reality for black. The game ended bishop d7. h4 is a very nice move, setting up queen h8 mate. Queen c7, g3. This works because there's no good check against the black king. Against the white king, I should say. And after queen c8, queen f4, king h7 and queen f7, Aronian resigned here because there's no good answer either to the advance of the a-pawn, or in the case of king h6, the simplest is just queen to g8, and the threat of mate on h8 basically forces the trade of queens, and the bishop ending with 2 connected passed pawns outside is just a very simple win. You would beat me if you had this position as white. So that's what I want to share with you. Baby Shakh chess. It's annoying, but not annoying like the song of Baby Shakh, but annoying in that he just plays so many good moves. It's very strong with the initiative. And we saw that Aronian was very close to equalizing, but somehow just wasn't able to deal that piece pressure. And after a couple of slips, that was all it took for Mamedyarov to win the pawn, to win the game, and ultimately to win the Superbet Classic of 2021, one of the early super tournaments over the board after the times of Corona. So yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments as well. I do try to get back to everyone who replies as much as possible. And also, yeah, I'm really excited to see you guys in the next video. So yeah, get out of here.